The murmur of the crowd intensified as the conference room filled up. Students, scholars, and curious onlookers settled into their seats, exchanging comments and speculations about the day's event. But among all the chatter, two names stood out with particular force: Keanu Reeves and Professor Richard Andersen. Keanu, known worldwide for his film career, was not just a Hollywood star, but also an introspective thinker, a man fascinated by the intersection of science, philosophy, and spirituality. His presence at an academic event like this was unusual, and even more so as an active participant rather than a passive spectator. Yet there he was, seated in the second-to-last row, wearing a serene, attentive expression. In front of him, at the center of the stage, Professor Richard Andersen was preparing his materials. Renowned for his sharp mind and openly skeptical stance, Andersen was famous not only for his knowledge, but also for his provocative style. He took delight in dismantling religious arguments with a blend of sarcasm and relentless logic, earning both admirers and critics alike. The title of that day's conference was "The Illusion of Faith in the Modern Age." It wasn't the first time Andersen had tackled the topic, but this time, unknowingly, he was about to face a challenge that would test not only his intellect, but also his humility. The room dimmed slightly as the lights focused on the stage. Andersen approached the podium, adjusted his glasses, and smiled with the confidence of someone who already felt victorious. "Good morning, everyone," he began, with his characteristic sardonic tone. "Today we'll discuss how critical thinking and scientific progress have dismantled, piece by piece, the ancient superstitions that once governed our understanding of the world." As he spoke, his words flowed with the precision of a well-calibrated clock. He projected a graph on the giant screen behind him, showing a downward trend. "Here we can see," he continued, "the correlation between rising IQ levels and the decline of religious beliefs. The more humanity learns, the less it needs supernatural explanations. Fascinating, isn't it?" Nervous laughter spread through the room, but Keanu Reeves remained still, his eyes fixed on the professor. He knew how these conferences worked, a display of superiority disguised as rationalism, but he also knew that truth rarely reveals itself through contempt. Sensing the audience's attention, Andersen decided to take the next step. "Mr. Reeves," he suddenly said, pointing toward him from the podium, "since we have such an illustrious guest among us, would you mind sharing your opinion? I'm curious how someone so successful can still cling to the idea of an invisible Heavenly Father." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Keanu, waiting for his reaction, but he didn't flinch. With the same calmness with which he had entered, he stood up and walked toward the front. "Professor Andersen," he said in a composed voice, "I'd be glad to respond, but not as a confrontation, rather as an exchange of ideas. Because, at the end of the day, we're not here to win an argument, but to get closer to the truth." Andersen's confidence wavered for a moment. He hadn't expected his prey to accept the challenge with such poise. But unable to back down, he smiled and gestured toward the podium. "Go ahead, Reeves. Enlighten us." Keanu turned to the audience and began, not with dogmatic arguments, but with questions. "What is truth, Professor? Is it only what we can measure and observe? Or are there realities beyond our reach, as the very science you uphold has taught us?" The room fell into absolute silence. The real debate had just begun. The silence that took hold of the room after Keanu Reeves's words was almost tangible. Even Professor Richard Andersen, accustomed to dominating conversations with his sharp tongue and unwavering confidence, seemed momentarily disarmed. However, his ego, fueled by years of rhetorical victories, would not allow him to remain silent for long. "Bravo, Mr. Reeves!" Andersen finally exclaimed, clapping with feigned admiration. "A speech worthy of a Hollywood script. But this isn't a movie set. We're in an academic environment where claims must be backed by evidence." Keanu, maintaining his composure, nodded. "I agree, Professor. But evidence is not always found in raw data. Sometimes it lies in human experience, in resilience, in the search for meaning. Science explains the how, but faith addresses the why." Andersen smiled, like a predator sensing weakness. The why? That's just an excuse to fill gaps in knowledge with myths. Humanity once attributed lightning to Zeus and plagues to divine wrath. Now we know they're natural phenomena. What makes you think your current why won't be another superstition debunked by science in a few decades? Keanu stepped toward the center of the stage, his hands relaxed at his sides. Because, Professor, there are questions that science, by its very nature, cannot answer. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does consciousness arise from inert matter? Why is the universe finely tuned to allow life? Science can describe processes, but not purpose. The audience, once divided between admiration for Andersen and curiosity about Reeves, began to shift. Some students who had laughed at the professor's initial jabs were now nodding slowly. Professor Thompson, seated in the front row, watched with growing interest. Realizing the changing atmosphere, Andersen decided to double down on his attack. Mr. Reeves, you're falling into the God of the gaps fallacy. Just because science hasn't explained something yet doesn't mean the answer is supernatural. Keanu smiled, as if he had been waiting for that very argument. And you, Professor, are falling into the fallacy of scientism. You assume that if something can't be measured or empirically proven, it has no value or existence. But science itself relies on unprovable axioms, the validity of logic, the uniformity of natural laws, the reliability of human perception. Isn't that, in itself, an act of faith? The room held its breath. Andersen opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come immediately. After a moment of hesitation, he tried to regain control. That's pure rhetoric. Science progresses without the need for dogmas. Every discovery expands our knowledge and reduces the space for unfounded beliefs. Keanu took a step forward, his gaze steady and his voice calm. And what drives that pursuit of knowledge, Professor? Curiosity, the hope of better understanding the universe, the longing for meaning. Those impulses don't arise from equations, but from something deeper, something faith has nurtured for millennia. Andersen crossed his arms, clearly irritated. So, according to you, we should return to the caves, worshipping the sun and fearing eclipses? Keanu shook his head, maintaining his composure. No, Professor. We should move forward, integrating both approaches. Science tells us how the world works. Faith helps us understand why it matters to us. Newton, Planck, Einstein, many of the greatest scientists were believers. They saw no contradiction between exploring the universe and recognizing a purpose beyond the material. The tension in the room was palpable. Professor Thompson, unable to hold back any longer, finally intervened. Enough, he exclaimed, standing up. This debate has revealed something important. It's not about science versus faith, but about arrogance versus humility. True wisdom lies in recognizing the limits of our knowledge and keeping our minds open to all possibilities. The audience erupted into applause. Andersen, pale and visibly shaken, lowered his gaze. Keanu, on the other hand, simply nodded, without a trace of triumphalism. Thank you, Professor Thompson, he said. That's precisely what I hope everyone takes away from this. The understanding that truth doesn't belong to a single field, but emerges at the intersection of them all. The conference had ended, but the echo of the debate would resonate long after the lights dimmed and the doors closed. And in the heart of every student present, a lesson remained, one not found in any textbook. The brightest mind is the one that recognizes that, no matter how much it knows, there is always more to learn. Don't miss out. Subscribe to our new channel now. Get ready for captivating stories, thought-provoking debates, and exclusive content you won't find anywhere else. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications to be the first to enjoy our latest uploads. Join our community today and let the journey begin.